Hi, a really warm welcome to my first video. So as I said in my introduction, I'm really passionate about evidence-based information. I'm also really passionate about equine nutrition. I think it's an area of horse management that's undervalued and often overlooked and underestimated actually in terms of the impact that it has on your horse's health and performance. So I'm going to start just by a short introduction to the horse's natural environment, how the horses naturally evolved to graze and the type of foodstuffs that the horse is designed to eat, and touching on the horse's digestive tract a little, but I'm going to go into more depth in my next video. So let's think about the horse in the wild. What do horses in the wild do? Well, first of all, they're together in herds, so any of you will know that horses are herd animals. They like to be with the herd, they like to follow the herd, and we use that herd instinct for training horses, for example. So we put an older, more experienced horse in front of a young horse to encourage that horse to go in the direction, or maybe jump a fence or something that's a little bit scary for that horse. And very social animals that communicate through body language, and they're very much grazing animals. They're what we call non-ruminant herbivores, so they're designed to eat a diet that is high in fibre and low in nutritional quality, and to eat that on an almost continual basis actually. So if you look at the time budget of horses in the wild, so over a 24-hour period, how much time do they spend grazing? Well, they actually spend somewhere between 16 and 20 hours eating. That's why when we talk about horses eating little and often, that's because that's how they instinctively eat. That's how they've evolved, and that's how their digestive tract has evolved to cope with those eating patterns. Horses are not designed physiologically to cope with large meals in one go and to go long periods of time without food. So on the wild, horses will roam over several kilometres per day, and they will graze a little, and they will walk, and they will graze a little more. But they will not eat diets that are naturally high in fat or starch. They're designed to eat diets that are high in fibre, and for that fibre actually to be of low nutritional quality, as I said. And if you think about how we've changed our management practices of the horse away from how it's evolved to meal feeding, so large amounts of food in one go, and sometimes horses standing for long periods of time, several hours, without food. If they finish a hay net, for example, during the night, they may be standing for a while before morning. And what we know about the horse's digestive tract is it is not good if a horse is left without food for a period of more than 3 hours. So I'm just going to touch a little bit about the structure, the overall structure of the horse's digestive tract, and then in the next video I'm going to go into more detail about which components of the food are digested in the different parts of the horse's digestive tract, and why that's important, that when we're thinking about feeding, we know where components of foods are digested so we can feed in the best way. So digestion begins in the mouth, where the horse bites the food, chews the food with, bites the food off with its incisors, chews the food with the molars. What that does is it reduces the particle size of the food, and that's really important. That reduction in particle size means that that food stuff can be better digested. The enzymes can get better access to those smaller feed particles. But what's also really important about that chewing process is that saliva is produced. Now the difference between us, for example, and horses is that we will produce saliva in anticipation of food. Horses will not. They only produce saliva as a direct result of chewing. Now saliva is important to facilitate the travel, the lubrication of the food to travel down the esophagus into the stomach. But it's also important because it contains buffers that maintains the correct pH in the stomach. So the food then travels down the esophagus into the stomach. And the stomach, the important thing to know about the stomach is it's in two halves, two parts, not two physical halves, but two parts. The upper part of the stomach and the lower part of the stomach. The upper part of the stomach has a higher pH than the lower part of the stomach. So the food comes into the top part of the stomach and that pH is higher. And it's the buffers in the saliva that help keep that pH higher. And why that pH has to be higher is because that part of the stomach does not have a protective lining, so that if the pH drops lower, it can have an effect on the lining of that stomach there. So low pH in that area can cause gastric ulcers, it can cause ulcers to form on the lining of the upper part of the stomach. In contrast, the lower part of the stomach does have a lower pH and can cope with that lower pH because of the fact that it has a protective lining. That means that the lower part of the stomach, the lining of the lower part of the stomach is protected from that lower pH and therefore less likely to have ulceration compared to the upper part of the stomach. And that lower pH in the bottom part of the stomach is there, because of horses eat undesirable microbes, bacteria. They ingest them along with the feed, and that kills off those undesirable microorganisms. So food then travels into the small intestine. That's the next part of the gastrointestinal tract of the horse. And this is where enzymatic digestion of foods takes place. So enzymes are released into the small intestine that break down components of the food such as fats, proteins and starches. What's important to know about the small intestine of the horse is that the horse is limited in the amount of starch that it can digest in the small intestine, and that's because of the amount of enzymes that the horse releases that are able to break down starch, and also the activity of those enzymes. So we know, compared to ourselves, so humans, and compared to pigs, horses are less able to cope with large amount of starch in one go. So that means large buckets of food that contain foods that are high in starch, so for example cereal grains, oats, barley, maize, etc. The horse doesn't cope well with that, and what happens is that starch passes to the hindgut. And I'm going to talk about the hindgut actually in my next video, because the hindgut's so important in the horse that it's maintained in a healthy for the horse's gut to be in good condition, and for the horse to remain healthy, as I said. The other thing that's to remember about the small intestinal digestion is that it's only the protein that's digested in the small intestine that's of benefit to the horse. So proteins that come into the small intestine are broken down by proteases, so that proteins are broken down into individual amino acids and they're absorbed across the gut wall. And those amino acids contribute to the amino acid pool of the horse. But any other proteins that travel through to the large intestine are used by the bacteria in the large intestine and are not of benefit directly to the horse. And again, I'm going to come onto that in more detail in my next video. And then actually fats, although horses don't naturally eat a lot of fat in their grazing environment because grass is low in fat, horses actually can deal with fat relatively well. They can digest reasonable amounts of fat in the diet, and so we can often say to people whose horses are a little underweight, they need a bit more condition, fat can be a really good source to add extra energy into the diet. So hopefully that's a good summary of the stomach and the small intestine. I hope you've enjoyed this first video, and my next video is going to talk in more detail about the horse's hindgut, the importance of maintaining a healthy hindgut, and how feeding practices, if they're not done in the correct way, can disrupt that environment. Thank you.